So this week on the Clarity Compressed podcast, I decided to invite my therapist.
And how do you feel about that decision?
I knew this was a bad idea.
Clarity can only really exist in the light of truth. Branding just isn't a tactic. It's a lifestyle change. Welcome to episode 60 of the Clarity Compressed podcast. My name is Paul J. Daly, and this week we have a really special guest, my therapist. And I know you just saw that funny little intro that we did. A lot of people, when I told them I was going to have my therapist on, they were like, "Are you nuts?" And I was like, "That's why I went to a therapist." This is a bad joke. But all in all, I think that the reason I wanted him on today is because it's a human game. Business is a human game. Entrepreneurship is a human game. Leadership is a human game, right? It's all human. And I think that we live in an age when we're encouraged to be human. We're encouraged to connect. And the principles that trip us up in our personal lives are often the same principles that trip us up in our business lives. And we talk about that a little bit and how those things really do migrate across your personal life, your business life, political life, whatever it is, how you operate on social media, how you treat your social media accounts, and how you really react to positive or negative feedback. And the bottom line is, it is all connected. And so I'm excited to bring this interview to you. But before I do, I want to talk about something really cool. And that is the fact that I am now an author. This book is called The Automotive Manifesto. It's called The Automotive Manifesto. And it's a book that I wrote to help us be more human as branders, marketers, specifically in the automotive industry. The subtitle of the book is How Brand Connection Can Save Retail Automotive. And the design team did an amazing job with this. It's a really fun read. They really designed it and laid it out well. I don't even know if you can see much of this, but it's just really well laid out, really well designed. And the point is, I want it to be a fast read. Pre-orders, let's see, I'm recording this a little bit before. Pre-order should be open now. So if you go to theautomotivemanifesto.com, you can pre-order the book and hopefully pick up a copy and connect with it a little bit, because the point of this book is something we talk about in this interview, and that is connection is at the center of human interaction. And that's what we all crave, and that's what we all want. So it's a funny thing that when brands and companies put connection at the center of their interaction with one another, at the center of their interaction with their customers, when they make connection the center, guess what? It goes better. Better customers, the customers they want, the customers that are aligned with their values. They get team members and employees who want to stay and want to connect with the business. Their marketing costs go down. In automotive, your cost per car goes down when you focus on connection, but it's not something we talk about in the industry, but we talk about it now. I'm excited to release this to the world. We'll link it up below and all that stuff. But for now, I hope you enjoy this interview with somebody who's been very meaningful to me in my life, has helped my wife and I a ton, and really the principle I talk about, clarity. This is the person that's probably brought more clarity to my life than anyone else I can think of, especially in the last 10 years, because he's helped me understand who I really am, who I really want to be, without all the crap that gets in the way and people's judgment and my desire to appease them. It's complicated because we're humans and it's complicated, but I'm excited to introduce you to Michael Lynch. Thank you for coming today. This is a real fun day for me.
Well, you're initiating me in something very new and different for me as well, so appreciate that.
I am. So if you didn't get to watch the intro or you're just dropping into this, we've worked together for a number of years. Mm-hmm. You worked as my therapist or counselor. You know, Sarah, my wife Sarah, she was like, "Oh, Mike's going to be on your show?" I said, "Yeah." She's like, "You might want to ask me next time." I was like, "Oh, I thought you knew," But she's on board. She's
good,
on board.
Good. We don't want this to be a fight after.
No, then we'll have to come see you again. And so I'm going to talk in the intro about how we came to know each other and things. But one of the reasons I think you make a lot of sense to have on this show is because my principle and concept of clarity. I have reminders on my hat. The flag stands for clarity. And when I think of the people in my life that have been in my life, especially part of the most recent decade, you are someone who has helped me find more clarity than probably anybody else, because of we worked together, right? My wife and I, we were having some issues and differences and difficulties, and we were stuck. And I know that a lot of people get stuck, and whether it's in a relationship, whether it's in their business interactions and things, which you've also helped me quite a bit with. So why don't we just start by you telling me and you telling the audience here, like, what exactly your position is on what you do every day as a therapist.
Well, to start with the concept of clarity, one of the things I do when I meet someone is I work to really understand them. And even the process of listening and understanding, trying to understand where they are, helps you to see and get to know them. And it actually helps them start to talk perhaps and sort through and create clarity for themselves. Because oftentimes we don't get the opportunity to actually sit down and have someone listen to us and have us explain ourselves to someone. So it forces you to be more self-aware, and it forces you to kind of work to organize your ideas and communicate them clearly. So the very process of listening starts to bring clarity to a person. I think the next thing is that usually they have a goal or a destination that they're trying to head towards, and as they explain that, and you start to understand not just simply how they think and feel and behave, but also the dance that happens between people and how they relate to one another, then you start to be able to pick out patterns of thinking, patterns of behaving, and patterns of interaction. And that's when people see that, then they can decide whether they want to stay with that or they want to change that.
Do you think that most of their lack of having that clarity is a result of them not having had the chance to work through it, like in kind of a, I don't know, I don't want to say like a scientific environment, but in an environment that's a little bit more decompressed? Like when you ask questions and try to draw it out, do you feel like most of the time the answer's in there already and you draw it out?
Yes, including it can be the answer is I'm confused. We don't really grow up being encouraged to be self-aware. So I think when you grow up in a family, in a neighborhood, in a community, as a kid, you're often just out to experience. You're just out to do and to live. And sometimes you might have an experience that upsets you, but you're wanting to resolve it versus understand it. If you come from a family that has normal families, will come with...
Are there normal families?
Yes, they all have problems. And the contradictions that are inside of family are things that we don't necessarily stop to work out the contradiction. We just want the problem to go away.
This level of self-awareness. Somebody that I follow and have been mentored by to an extent, his name is Gary Vaynerchuk, and he talks a lot about self-awareness as being like the ultimate superpower. Because when you're self-aware and you understand your motivations, you understand why you do things, you're really free to make decisions based on the truth of what you actually want and the truth of what you need. You mentioned self-awareness as kind of like we have to get there first. You understand you're doing these things or you're not doing these things. Then you kind of continue on and say the big reason that a lot of people don't want to get to that point is because they're afraid of this level of judgment.
So right now, in our culture, there's not much social maturity going on. There's not much...
That's a big statement, okay?
Yes.
So I think that's worth kind of talking about for a second. Premise, thesis being, in our culture, there's not much
self-differentiation or emotional maturity going on in conversations with people.
Why?
Because emotionally, people are really worked up such that they're saying my truth has to be dominated, whether you're from the left or the right.
So politically.
So in the political realm,
Yep.
there's a battling over ideas. For instance, here, you could walk yourself down. In your family, parents are usually introducing ideas or values by which you want people to live by. So your family will live by these rules. There could be that too in the community. There can be that too in this business. You introduce values and beliefs that you want everyone to operate by.
Yep.
And if you do operate by them, you hold people consistently to that. Well, that's also true at the national level. And so here are these people introducing ideas that they want the country to adapt to. And yet, we should probably be saying, I don't really think I can trust this. And lo and behold, our culture is not really trusting the leadership because it's not very mature.
Yeah.
It's this yelling and screaming, and TV is news. People are now just turning off the news because...
Who can be more sensational?
Yeah.
Right? It's just a co-escalation, right? Who can be louder?
One of the persons made an observation about news where somebody's invited on to talk, and the person who invites them on just dominates the whole conversation.
Just yells at
Is
them.
that right? Yes. Okay. Well, then on with my point.
Right. That's actually how it is.
Yeah. And so there is no connection. And I think being a person on that news channel is really difficult because they're just dominating me to get the credence that I agree, when really I haven't had any participation. And that's an abusive relationship in a sense, if you boil it back down to a husband and wife.
Right. If the news cycle was an actual relationship, husband and wife, we would easily classify that as it's abusive.
Yeah.
Right? And when we treat people like that and have conversations like that, it is defined as, well, that's abusive.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty enlightening. So I think that paints a lot of context for relationship in general. We just, you kind of framed it up in the sense of like the news and this emotional maturity that we see in the media and that we see. I mean, we see it a lot on social media too, right? The way people interact with one another, the way it's just, it can be a very hostile environment. There's low accountability. It's especially if you're just typing messages or you don't really know the person, right? The ability or the desire or willingness to go more venomous and more aggressive, really, it's a lot of abuse.
Right. So when you take a look at, it was MySpace, and then it was Facebook. But what's interesting about the name MySpace is if MySpace is where people like me or where people talk to me, etc., I have some of my identity in my profile. And if I have been abused growing up, physically abused, emotionally abused, sexually abused, or all of the above, I'm much more vulnerable to being a victim and passive. So that when someone sends I hate you and talks about things, it will have a greater impact on that person. They will be more likely to take in that and believe that about themselves, and that's when we have this experience of people commit suicide because they're not liked or they're raked over the coals for some position that they took.
And by people who don't even know them. So now a stranger's opinion somewhere in the digital universe of me has now affected me so deeply that I'd be willing to hurt myself or feel bad about my life in general.
Right. Yes, and that's a child who hasn't had a chance. This is why child abuse on any of those levels is awful, because it creates trauma that makes people less able to think through things. And as a result, they just are more likely to be reactionary. They don't have the same ability to be self-aware, self-differentiated, and to regulate themselves. That is, choose how to behave.
Let's pivot for a minute and talk about the business community. So a lot of people that watch the podcast and listen to the podcast are business leaders. They have people that work for them, or they're entrepreneurs and they're operating in this business world. How does the psychology of company culture interacting with one another that you work with, how important and how influenced is that by the leader?
Oh, I think it depends upon the leader.
Okay.
So if if I stayed in this realm, so of how you grow up and whether you're self-aware, if I have grown up and I am in a position of passivity, likely I'll be a leader that is passive. If I've grown up aggressive, then I might grow up, I will be an aggressive leader. And if I am somewhat disorganized, or I will be all over the block on that, or if I'm secure in myself, I will have my positions and I will be able to move people into going about living their life with these positions I would like as a leader. So for instance, you can look at the history of leaders in countries and see my point. We could look with maybe a little bit better visibility at who Putin is, or Chavez in Venezuela. These are individuals who I think probably come from an aggressive bent. And they have risen to power, and they dictate and run things. In fact, if you step out of line, there's really strong negative consequences, such that people want to flee. But this came out of how they grew up. To take one that everyone talks about, is that there can be very charming leaders. For instance, Hitler was a charming leader. And yet, the ideas that he introduced were never really evaluated. They were allowed to go on because of his charisma.
Because of the charm. So you were listening, you said you were listening to a Canadian...
Oh, sorry?
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing it back. So what he talked about was, as an outsider, he looked at Trump and Hillary Clinton. And what he talked about was, he cited two different events that were truly traumatic for both Trump and Hillary Clinton. And he said, you can see that when she lost and when he's attacked, the effects of trauma in their life.
How about that?
And how Hillary Clinton, when she lost, she couldn't really come out. She kind of shut down and was unavailable to come out and present or say, you know, I'm going to admit defeat and all the rest. She had really shut down. And he was taking a look at that as an example of childhood trauma that had come up and continued to influence her. Much like when you look at Trump and you have everyone hating on him, well, the issue is we could also look at his background and see trauma.
So to kind of, I think those general principles of leadership, and I've never thought about that, you know, the question of like, hey, we never really approach presidential candidates with the level of evaluation that most other people are approached with, and from the sense of like, why are they doing those things, right? We just want to kind of like put a political reason on it and then keep moving. In the business world, what are some of the things that make the best leaders? The best business leaders, the best team leaders? What are the traits that, and I think I already know where you're going to go with this, but I think it's always worth asking this question, especially in the business community. There's been a zillion books on leadership, and a lot of them have principles, and a lot of them have this 5 steps to being a great leader and all that. But I want to go real high level. And what are the traits that you see in successful business leaders, team leaders, managers, people that are in charge of other people?
So I was going to say, if you were to poll the community and say how many people are thrilled to go in and buy a car,
It's a relevant example.
Isn't probably a lot of the people that would be polled would be, I'm struggling. This is a relationship of distrust.
The data shows that like 90+% expect a hassle.
Okay.
Almost everybody, almost.
So I don't know how much the public knows about how you run things, but if you were to say to me, I think in the long run, relationship, trust, honesty, a good product, both people winning, would probably win out in the end. Maybe not in the short term, but maybe.
Yeah.
Because those are the things people are looking for. They're looking for, how can I go and experience a trusting relationship where it's both of us are going to win. In fact, do I even believe, given my past experience, that both of us can actually win?
Do you even believe it's possible?
Right. Not just as a business concept, but really deeper as a relationship concept. Because you have to have a business that operates on good relational experiences, otherwise the people won't follow you. But if you have a relationship working inside the business, then they'll turn around and take that philosophy out to the business people.
Right. It's like the clients, customers, whatever you want to call them. That's a really good point in the sense that it starts with the leader, transfers to the team, transfers to the customer. Right? The leader can't just say, hey, this is what I want the customer to experience. He can't do that for everybody. He sets the tone, he makes the team safe and the team trusting, then they can portray that trust, connect. So it's I showed you the book that I wrote. You didn't have a chance to look through it, but that is the thesis of the book, is that it's connection. Like that trusting connection between the leader and the team, the trusting connection between the team and the end consumer is what makes it funny. I promise this was not pre-negotiated. So I have a final question. Actually, the final question is from my wife.
Oh.
Yeah. Last night she said, hey, you should ask him this. And I was like, that's the last question. Great one. So
all right,
you're going to get the last question, courtesy of my wife, Sarah. Now, you're a therapist, counselor. You work with a lot of families, a lot of individuals that get stuck in places. I have found so much freedom by going through the process. My wife and I have found so much freedom in going through the process of therapy. And I also see it quasi-therapy being abused today into now, and I'm really curious your opinion on this, people saying like, my therapist is like my best friend, I can't wait to see them, but then people don't have actual friends, right? Can and should a therapist be functioning as a person's friend? And I know that's like a real weird left turn, but I guess my end goal in this is I want to share the freedom that I've gotten through going through the process. And so for anyone who's watching, to maybe if you're kind of on the borderline saying, you know what, maybe this could help. Maybe talking to somebody could help, but without going so far to the extent of saying like, that's going to save me.
Save you in the sense of?
It's a complicated question.
So the first point you said is, for you, therapy felt like you increased freedom.
Yes.
And I would say this, to me, that means you became more yourself. In our field, we talk about the true self or the false self.
Yep.
Or we could talk about how much is free to be me and how much is codependent and hidden. And that could be codependent and hidden from my childhood,
Yep.
or with my spouse,
Yep.
or with my boss, or
Yep.
whatever. So you experience freedom from getting out from underneath your adapted way of coping.
Yes.
Into your real self, and
Yes.
you feel great because you're you.
Yep.
So that happens in good therapy regardless.
Okay.
Whether you go on or not is kind of a weird thing in this. It was set up originally, way back in the day with Freud, that you wouldn't even be able to see him, he wouldn't say much, etc.
Okay.
In order to present no contamination or no transference, contransfer. And what it means, right, is you're coming in to get help from me. You don't want me to mess you up more.
Right. Fair.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, this was the attempt back in that day to do that. It failed miserably. It was a structure, but it failed miserably back then to not contaminate. And I think because there was very little connection to the person, it was sort of like dealing with a cadaver. So anyway, that might be a rude thing, but the issue is there wasn't enough relationship. There wasn't enough connection. There wasn't enough getting to know. So now today you have this issue of, should your therapist be your friend? Should he come in and talk on a private show? But
Right.
but the issue is, it's in a way unnatural. And I would say it's unnatural in the sense that once you form a deep relationship with someone, and granted, I would know more about you than you know about me, but the issue would be there's a lot of professional ethics that say, no, that's not possible. Especially if people in my field were to take advantage of our power. But on the other side of it, there's this thing about we could have a relationship, but it would have to change. I'd have to be willing to reveal. I'd have to be willing to let go of my power. I'd have to do these different things. And our field has really said, we're not going to work with that. We don't know how to do that. And the issue is, let's be healthy. It would be better to focus on trying to help the culture stop using power to abuse. And that starts all the way back with how we raise our kids, what our values are. It goes on and on.
That makes sense. I think that that's, for me, that definitely was what happened, right? And with Sarah and I won't speak for her, but in our relationship, we got to be more us. So why we related to each other and connected is because we finally got past all the garbage that we had from parents and we had from upbringing, and we said, like, that's who you are. This is who I am. We still want to be connected. We want to continue to increase that connection. And there's hard things that come with that, right? Because you realize, okay, what this person really is a little different than what I signed up for. At the same point, it's just like I kind of came in with a skewed version of who I was too, and then that really solidifies a relationship, I think. At least it did in our case. You know, what happened in my case too, like outside of our relationship, just in my relationships at work and with team members and things like that, all of a sudden it introduced this, and you watched a lot of this, is where once I realized the truth about who I was and what was actually codependent and what wasn't, there's an element where I had relationships that I really depended on just seemed to disintegrate very, very quickly.
Right.
And the difference in me being okay with that is because I realized, like, once you see that truth, you just realize, like, I'm never going back to that.
Yeah.
And that was painful. So, like, that realization has caused a lot of pain, but not pain that was greater than the benefit on the other side. And so for people who are watching or considering, like, can I really be myself? Can I really be the real person and not in a codependent relationship or appeasing relationship? Like, I would say it's worth it. It's worth it, because here I am, you know, a year, 2 years later, not getting into those relationships again, and I'm much freer and much happier and much healthier. And I think the relationships that I have now are founded on the right principles, so I don't feel that pressure in the it's been really good. Last question. Oh, do you have?
No, I'm going to say this is the second to the last question.
This is the actual last question. It's the actual last question.
Okay.
And the question is, well, it starts with me giving you a magic wand.
Yeah.
Right? So now you have a magic wand and you can wave it. And if you could wave that magic wand and have everybody that's watching, listening, comes across this, if you could have them accept one thing, one truth, what would it be and why? You only get one, though.
If I go back to self-differentiation, and I wish everyone could pursue self-differentiation for their own personal well-being. That is their spirit, their mind, their emotions and body. I realize they have to have an attitude of, I want to learn. I want to understand. I want to become self-aware, and I want to move through a process of growth. And that alone can help you get further. But I think a lot of people don't go through life that way. So I would probably wish that they would say, there's a possibility with the concept I introduced, they could end up free. And their life is lighter and better. And the process, though, can allow you to keep going.
That's a good one.
Okay.
I don't think it was too complicated.
Okay.
I think it's really fundamental, and at the bottom it's like, yes, understand. So just so everybody gets it, to accept the fact that there is a place that is free, and that if I pursue this path of self-differentiation, I'm on the right track.
Right.
Like, it's the first step. Right? First step, admitting. Right.
Right. And that new reality can lead to that great end.
Well, there you have it. That is the final word from Mike Lynch. Thank you so much for joining
You're
us
welcome.
today. And I hope that everyone watching, and myself included, just takes another step forward towards the clarity that I pursue and that I want everyone else to pursue as well. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me on.
It's great. So there you have it. My interview with Mike Lynch, episode 60. I love how he brings everything to like a very baseline human level. And it doesn't matter if it's in business, personal, it doesn't matter if it's social media. Really, the behaviors are all the same. And when you are free to be the truest version of yourself and you have that self-awareness, the desire to pursue that self-awareness, well, then you can start making sense to why you do things and why you want to do certain things and why you don't want to do certain things. And the real you is the you that we want to know. So he's probably the single most influential person in my life in the last 10 years that has helped me get the most clarity on my own self and my own desires and motivations. And I thought it'd be really cool to introduce you to him. And hopefully you got a little bit of that as well. So that's really it for episode 60. A couple quick notes again. The Automotive Manifesto dropping very soon. Pre-orders are open now. We're linked it up below. We're also having an event in Rochester, New York, ClarityCon Automotive 2019 on May 8th in Rochester. More details on that coming soon. We're doing so much right now. It's kind of crazy, but I think here at Congruent, we kind of operate well. We kind of operate well and crazy. So we're going to do our best. And thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Have a great week. Episode 60.